Most people are taught the same lesson from childhood. Be kind, be generous, put others first, and life will reward you, but the world rarely operates according to those rules. Look closely at history, the workplace, friendships, politics, or even your own life. You'll note a disturbing pattern. The people who are always available, always agreeable, and always sacrificing themselves are often the ones who are overlooked, taken for granted, and quietly left behind. Why? Is kindness a weakness, or is there something far deeper happening beneath the surface of human psychology? The truth is, people don't simply respond to kindness, they respond to confidence, boundaries, status, and perceived value. When kindness exists without strength, it can unintentionally invite disrespect instead of admiration. In today's speech, we'll uncover the hidden psychological forces that make nice people finish last. You'll discover why people unconsciously test your limits, why being overly agreeable lowers your perceived value, and how the most respected individuals balance compassion with power. Let's begin. Being nice is often presented as one of the highest virtues a person can possess. From an early age, we are taught to share, forgive, avoid conflict, and place the needs of others before our own. Society praises those who are selfless, patient, and accommodating. These qualities are associated with morality, trustworthiness, and emotional maturity. Yet many people eventually discover a painful contradiction. Despite doing everything they were told was right, they find themselves ignored, underestimated, or taken for granted. They become the dependable friend who is rarely appreciated, the employee who works the hardest but receives little recognition, or the family member who constantly sacrifices without receiving the same care in return. This experience is not simply bad luck. It reflects a deeper psychological reality about how people perceive value, confidence, and social dynamics. Kindness itself is not the problem. The hidden cost appears when kindness becomes excessive accommodation, when generosity turns into self-neglect, and when the desire to avoid conflict overrides the need for self-respect. Human beings naturally observe behavior more than words. Every action sends a signal. When someone consistently says yes to every request, apologizes unnecessarily, or suppresses their own opinions to keep others comfortable, people often interpret those behaviors in ways the person never intended. Instead of seeing generosity, they may see insecurity. Instead of seeing patience, they may see hesitation. Instead of seeing humility, they may assume a lack of confidence. This happens because people constantly assess one another through subtle social cues. Confidence is communicated not only by what someone says, but also by what they tolerate. A person who never defends their time, never protects their energy, and never expresses disagreement may unintentionally signal that their own needs are less important. Once that perception is established, many people begin treating them accordingly. Psychologists have long observed that people tend to value what appears limited. Scarcity increases perceived worth. This principle applies not only to products or opportunities, but also to attention, availability, and personal energy. Someone who is endlessly available can gradually become predictable. Their kindness becomes expected rather than appreciated. Acts that once inspired gratitude slowly become obligations others assume will always be fulfilled. There is another hidden cost that often goes unnoticed. Constantly prioritizing others can weaken a person's own sense of identity. Instead of making choices based on personal values, they begin making decisions based on avoiding disappointment or gaining approval. Over time, they lose touch with what they genuinely want because their focus shifts entirely towards satisfying everyone else. Approval is a powerful emotional reward. The human brain is naturally wired to seek acceptance because belonging has always been important for survival. Throughout history, being rejected by a group could mean danger. Even today, this ancient instinct influences everyday behavior. Many people fear saying no because they worry about conflict, criticism, or rejection. They choose temporary comfort over long-term respect. Ironically, the more someone sacrifices their own boundaries to gain acceptance, the less authentic that acceptance becomes. Relationships built on constant accommodation often depend on continued sacrifice. people grow accustomed to receiving without considering whether they are giving equally in return. What began as kindness slowly transforms into an unspoken expectation. This dynamic appears in workplaces as well. An employee who constantly volunteers for extra assignments without recognition may believe hard work alone will guarantee advancement. While dedication is valuable, organizations often reward those who combine competence with visible confidence. If someone never negotiates, never highlights their contributions, and never communicates their value, others may overlook their efforts simply because they assume the person is satisfied with the current arrangement. The same pattern exists in friendships. The individual who always initiates conversations, adjusts their schedule, pays emotional attention, and solves everyone else's problems may eventually feel exhausted. Their generosity becomes invisible because it has become normal. Appreciation fades when people stop noticing what they receive consistently. This does not mean human beings are naturally cruel. Many people simply adapt to the patterns presented to them. If someone repeatedly places themselves last, others may unconsciously accept that position without questioning it. Social habits become routines, and routines become expectations. The hidden cost of being too nice is therefore not kindness itself, but the silent message that unlimited giving requires nothing in return. When personal boundaries disappear, personal value often becomes harder for others to recognize. Respect grows strongest when kindness is supported by confidence, self-respect, and the willingness to protect one's own time, energy, and principles. Kindness is one of the most admired human qualities, yet it is also one of the most misunderstood. Many people assume that if they are generous, patient, and considerate, they will naturally earn respect from everyone around them. They believe good intentions automatically produce positive outcomes. However, human psychology is far more complex than that. People do not judge others solely by their intentions. Instead, they constantly interpret behavior, searching for signals about confidence, strength, competence, and status. This is why genuine kindness can sometimes be mistaken for weakness, especially when it exists without clear boundaries. The misunderstanding begins with perception. Every interaction communicates something beyond the words being spoken. Body language, tone of voice, decision-making, and reactions to pressure all influence how others form opinions. A person who repeatedly avoids confrontation, hesitates to express disagreement, or agrees with everyone to maintain peace may believe they are demonstrating maturity. Another person, however, may interpret the same behavior as uncertainty or fear. The difference lies not in the action itself, but in the meaning attached to it. Human beings naturally look for patterns. When someone consistently places other people's needs above their own, observers often assume this behavior reflects their internal confidence. If a person rarely speaks up, never negotiates, and accepts unfair treatment without objection, people may conclude that the individual lacks the confidence to defend themselves. That assumption can shape future interactions in subtle but powerful ways. Social psychology suggests that people unconsciously test one another's boundaries. These tests are not always intentional or malicious. Sometimes they appear in simple situations, such as asking for an extra favor, interrupting someone repeatedly, borrowing something without returning it promptly, or expecting immediate responses at any hour. The response to these small situations teaches others what is acceptable. When every request is accepted without question, the expectation grows that future requests will also be accepted. This process rarely happens overnight. It develops gradually through repeated experiences. A colleague who notices that one employee always agrees to stay late may continue assigning additional work to that person. Friends who realize someone never refuses invitations may stop considering whether the timing is convenient. Family members who depend on one person's endless patience may unconsciously expect that patience to continue indefinitely. Confidence and kindness are often confused because they can appear similar on the surface while producing very different social signals. A confident person may choose to help others, but their assistance comes from choice rather than obligation. They know they have the right to decline without guilt. Their kindness is selective and intentional. In contrast, someone driven by fear of rejection may help everyone regardless of personal cost. Although both individuals perform generous acts, observers often sense the difference in attitude. People are generally drawn to those who display quiet confidence. Confidence communicates emotional stability. It suggests that a person knows their worth and does not rely entirely on external approval. This creates a sense of predictability and trust. Weakness, on the other hand, is often associated with uncertainty, hesitation, and excessive dependence on the opinions of others. When kindness becomes inseparable from people-pleasing, it may accidentally resemble those traits. Another reason kindness is mistaken for weakness is that many individuals confuse compassion with passivity. Compassion means understanding another person's feelings and treating them with respect. Passivity means avoiding action even when action is necessary. A compassionate person can still disagree, enforce rules, and protect their interests. A passive person often remains silent even when they know something is unfair. To outside observers, silence can appear as acceptance. History, leadership, and everyday life consistently show that respected individuals combine warmth with firmness. They listen carefully but speak honestly. They help willingly but refuse exploitation. They forgive mistakes but do not ignore repeated disrespect. This balance sends a clear psychological message that kindness is a strength supported by self-respect rather than a sign of vulnerability. Emotional intelligence also plays an important role. Individuals with high emotional intelligence understand that protecting personal boundaries is not selfish. They recognize their own emotions, communicate them clearly, and remain calm under pressure. Because they express their limits without hostility, others are more likely to respect those limits. Their kindness remains genuine because it is freely given rather than forced by fear. Cultural expectations can further reinforce the misunderstanding. Many societies praise self-sacrifice while discouraging assertiveness, especially when assertiveness is mistaken for aggression. As a result, people may grow up believing that saying no is rude, expressing disagreement is disrespectful, or prioritizing personal needs is selfish. These beliefs create adults who struggle to separate kindness from constant compliance. Manipulative individuals are particularly skilled at identifying those who have difficulty enforcing boundaries. They often begin with small requests and gradually increase their demands. They rely on guilt, obligation, or emotional pressure rather than mutual respect. Their behavior succeeds not because kindness is weak, but because unchecked kindness provides opportunities for exploitation. The real strength of kindness emerges only when it is supported by confidence, self-awareness, and clear personal limits. A person who values themselves can remain generous without becoming submissive, patient without becoming invisible, and compassionate without surrendering their dignity. Respect is one of the most misunderstood forces in human relationships. Many people believe respect is earned by being agreeable, generous, and constantly available to others. They assume that if they avoid conflict, never disappoint anyone, and always put other people first, respect will naturally follow. But psychology tells a different story. Respect is not created through endless accommodation. It is created through a balance of warmth, confidence, consistency, and clearly defined boundaries. A boundary is more than simply saying no. It is a psychological statement about what you value, what you will accept, and how you expect to be treated. Every person has invisible boundaries, whether they realize it or not. These boundaries protect time, emotional energy, personal values, privacy, and self-respect. When they are communicated clearly, they help create healthy relationships. When they are absent, confusion and imbalance often take their place. Human beings constantly observe one another for social cues. These observations happen automatically, often without conscious awareness. People notice how someone reacts under pressure, whether they defend their opinions, how they respond to unfair treatment, and whether they prioritize their own needs alongside the needs of others. These behaviors become signals that shape perception. A person who consistently protects their boundaries often appears more confident and emotionally stable than someone who allows every limit to be crossed. One reason boundaries influence respect is because they demonstrate self-worth. If you consistently communicate that your time is valuable, other people are more likely to treat it as valuable. If you repeatedly allow interruptions, last-minute demands, or unfair expectations without objection, others may unconsciously assume those behaviors are acceptable. Over time, what begins as an exception gradually becomes the standard. This process is explained through reinforcement. In psychology, behaviors that receive no resistance are more likely to continue. Imagine a coworker who frequently asks you to complete part of their responsibilities. The first request seems harmless, so you agree. The next request feels similar, and again you accept. Eventually, helping becomes expected rather than appreciated. The coworker is not necessarily acting with bad intentions. They have simply learned through repeated experience that you rarely refuse. The same pattern appears in friendships and families. Someone who always changes their schedule for everyone else may eventually realize that no one adjusts their plans in return. The imbalance develops slowly because each individual compromise appears insignificant. Yet dozens of small compromises accumulate into a relationship where one person's needs consistently outweigh another's. Healthy boundaries create predictability. They help people understand what behavior is appropriate and what behavior is not. Contrary to popular belief, clear limits often strengthen relationships instead of damaging them. People generally feel more secure when expectations are consistent. Unclear expectations create uncertainty, frustration, and resentment. Another important psychological principle is reciprocity. Human beings naturally respond to fairness. Most healthy relationships involve an ongoing exchange of support, attention, and respect. When one person gives continuously while receiving very little in return, the balance begins to disappear. Ironically, excessive giving can reduce appreciation because the effort becomes expected instead of recognized. The value of generosity decreases when it appears unlimited. Boundaries also reduce emotional exhaustion. Many people who struggle with people-pleasing experience chronic stress because they constantly manage other people's emotions while ignoring their own. They feel responsible for everyone's happiness, comfort, and approval. This responsibility becomes mentally exhausting because it is impossible to satisfy every expectation. The fear of disappointing others gradually replaces authentic decision-making. Assertiveness plays a central role in boundary setting. Assertiveness is often confused with aggression, but they are fundamentally different. Aggression ignores the rights of others in pursuit of personal goals. Assertiveness respects both your own rights and the rights of those around you. It allows someone to express disagreement calmly, decline unreasonable requests politely, and communicate expectations without hostility. Emotionally mature individuals understand that disagreement is not disrespect. They recognize that healthy relationships can survive honest conversations. In fact, relationships often become stronger after respectful conflict because both people gain a clearer understanding of each other's values and expectations. Avoiding every disagreement may preserve temporary peace, but it often creates hidden resentment beneath the surface. Boundaries also influence personal identity. Every time someone honors their own values instead of acting solely to gain approval, they reinforce a stronger sense of self. They become guided by principles rather than fear. This consistency makes their behavior more predictable, and predictability increases trust. People tend to respect individuals whose actions consistently reflect their beliefs. Social status is influenced by this consistency as well. Individuals who calmly defend their values without becoming defensive often project quiet confidence. They do not demand respect through intimidation or manipulation. Instead, their behavior communicates that they recognize their own worth. This quiet certainty often earns more admiration than loud displays of authority. Many people fear that setting boundaries will make them appear selfish or uncaring. In reality, healthy boundaries allow kindness to remain genuine. When generosity is freely chosen rather than emotionally forced, it becomes more meaningful. People who respect themselves are better able to respect others because their compassion comes from abundance instead of obligation. Respect grows where kindness and self-respect exist together, supported by clear boundaries that protect dignity, fairness, and emotional balance. Seeking approval is one of the most deeply rooted human instincts. From childhood, people learn that praise feels rewarding while criticism feels uncomfortable. A child who behaves well receives encouragement, attention, and acceptance. Over time, the brain begins to associate approval with safety and belonging. This pattern is completely natural because throughout human history, accepted by a group often meant survival. Isolation carried serious risks, so the desire to fit in became deeply embedded in human psychology. While this instinct helped our ancestors, it can become destructive when the pursuit of approval begins to control every decision. Many people organize their lives around avoiding disappointment rather than pursuing authenticity. They hesitate before expressing an opinion, fearing disagreement. They agree to commitments they do not want because they worry about appearing selfish. They remain silent when someone crosses a line because they fear damaging the relationship. Every decision becomes filtered through one question: what will other people think? Instead of living according to personal values, they begin living according to imagined expectations. This constant search for validation slowly erodes self-confidence. Confidence grows when people trust their own judgment and act according to their principles. Approval seeking creates the opposite effect. It teaches the mind that every important decision must first be approved by someone else. As this habit strengthens, personal identity becomes increasingly dependent on external reactions rather than internal conviction. Psychologists describe this as an external locus of evaluation. Instead of measuring success through personal standards, individuals judge themselves through the opinions of others. A compliment creates temporary happiness, while criticism causes disproportionate emotional pain. Mood becomes unstable because it depends on factors that cannot be controlled. Since every person has different expectations, attempting to satisfy everyone becomes an impossible task. One of the greatest psychological traps of approval seeking is that it creates inconsistency. Different people want different things. One friend values honesty above all else. Another prefers harmony, even if it means avoiding difficult conversations. One employer rewards initiative, while another prefers strict obedience. Someone who constantly adapts to satisfy everyone eventually develops inconsistent behavior. They change their personality depending on who is present. This inconsistency makes it difficult for others to understand who they truly are. Ironically, authenticity is one of the qualities people respect most. Individuals who possess clear values and communicate them honestly often earn trust, even from those who disagree with them. Their consistency creates predictability. Others know where they stand because their actions remain aligned with their beliefs. Approval seekers, on the other hand, may unintentionally appear uncertain because their opinions shift to match the surrounding environment. Another hidden consequence is the inability to make difficult decisions. Every meaningful achievement requires disappointing someone at some point. Pursuing a career may disappoint family expectations. Setting boundaries may upset demanding friends. Refusing unreasonable requests may create temporary tension at work. People who fear disapproval often avoid these necessary decisions, choosing comfort over growth. They remain trapped in situations that no longer serve them simply because leaving might invite criticism. Approval seeking also attracts unhealthy relationships. Manipulative individuals quickly recognize those who struggle to say no. They understand that guilt, emotional pressure, and subtle criticism can influence someone who depends heavily on external validation. Such individuals often use praise as a reward and withdrawal of affection as punishment. This creates an unhealthy cycle where the approval seeker works even harder to regain acceptance. Healthy relationships function differently. Mutual respect replaces constant validation. Both individuals are free to express disagreement without fearing rejection. They appreciate honesty because honesty creates trust. They understand that love, friendship, and respect do not require constant agreement. Social media has intensified the psychology of approval in modern life. Likes, comments, shares, and followers provide immediate feedback that can easily become addictive. Every notification offers a small burst of satisfaction, encouraging people to seek more. Over time, some individuals begin measuring their worth through digital reactions rather than real personal growth. They carefully shape their words, appearance, and opinions based on what receives the most positive response rather than what genuinely reflects their beliefs. Neuroscience helps explain this behavior. Positive social feedback activates reward systems in the brain, releasing chemicals associated with pleasure and motivation. The brain naturally wants to repeat behaviors that produce these rewarding feelings. However, when self-worth becomes tied to these temporary rewards, emotional stability becomes increasingly fragile. Praise feels necessary instead of enjoyable. Developing independence from approval does not mean rejecting all feedback. Constructive criticism remains valuable because it helps people learn and improve. The difference lies in the source of self-worth. Confident individuals listen to advice without allowing every opinion to define them. They evaluate feedback thoughtfully, accepting what aligns with reality while rejecting what conflicts with their values. Personal growth requires accepting that not everyone will understand, support, or agree with every decision. Every successful leader, creator, entrepreneur, and innovator has faced criticism. If they had allowed the fear of disapproval to control them, many of their greatest contributions would never have existed. The willingness to tolerate misunderstanding often separates those who remain ordinary from those who create meaningful change. True confidence emerges when actions are guided by principles instead of applause. A person who respects their own values no longer depends on constant reassurance because their decisions are anchored in internal conviction rather than shifting public opinion. Their sense of value comes from character, discipline, and authenticity instead of temporary approval from others. Most people enter relationships believing that others think the same way they do. If they are honest, they assume honesty will be returned. If they are generous, they expect gratitude. If they are loyal, they believe loyalty will naturally come back to them. This expectation is understandable because people often judge others through the lens of their own character. However, human psychology is far more diverse. Not everyone values fairness, empathy, or mutual respect equally. Some individuals recognize kindness as a virtue, while others see it as an opportunity. This difference explains why manipulative people are often drawn toward those who struggle to protect their own boundaries. Manipulation rarely begins with obvious control or aggression. It usually starts with small requests and subtle emotional pressure. A manipulative person first observes how someone responds to minor situations. They may ask for a simple favor, request extra time, borrow something without urgency, or expect immediate attention. These actions serve as tests rather than necessities. The response provides valuable information. If the other person consistently agrees without hesitation, the manipulator learns that resistance is unlikely. Psychologists often describe this process as gradual escalation. Once a small request is accepted, a slightly larger one follows. Each successful interaction expands what the manipulator believes they can ask for. The individual being manipulated may not notice the change because each request appears only slightly different from the previous one. Over weeks or months, however, the pattern becomes obvious. What once seemed like occasional generosity slowly transforms into constant obligation. One reason kind people become vulnerable is that they often dislike conflict. They fear that refusing a request will damage the relationship or make them appear selfish. This fear creates an internal struggle. Even when they recognize something feels unfair, they may remain silent to preserve harmony. Manipulative individuals recognize this hesitation and use it to their advantage. Guilt is one of the most common psychological tools used in manipulation. Instead of making direct demands, manipulators often imply that saying no reflects poor character. They use phrases that encourage obligation rather than cooperation. They remind someone of past favors, exaggerate their own difficulties, or suggest that only an uncaring person would refuse. The goal is not honest communication but emotional pressure. The conversation shifts away from whether the request is reasonable and focuses instead on whether the other person feels guilty enough to comply. Another powerful tactic is inconsistency. Some manipulative individuals alternate between kindness and criticism. They offer praise when their wishes are fulfilled and become distant or disappointed when they encounter resistance. This unpredictable behavior creates emotional confusion. The other person begins working harder to regain approval, believing they have done something wrong. Over time, they become increasingly dependent on positive reactions from the manipulator. Flattery can also become a form of manipulation. Compliments are not always sincere expressions of appreciation. Sometimes they are carefully placed before a request. A manipulative person may describe someone as exceptionally generous, dependable, or selfless immediately before asking for another favor. These compliments create psychological pressure because the individual wants to remain consistent with the positive image they have just received. Empathy, although one of humanity's greatest strengths, can also become a weakness when it lacks discernment. Kind people naturally try to understand other people's struggles. They often give second chances and assume mistakes result from temporary hardship rather than intentional behavior. While compassion is valuable, manipulators sometimes rely on this tendency by presenting themselves as constant victims. Every broken promise has an excuse. Every irresponsible action has a dramatic explanation. Every failure becomes someone else's fault. Because empathetic individuals want to help, they continue investing time and energy despite repeated disappointment. Manipulation often succeeds because it exploits predictable patterns of human behavior rather than extraordinary intelligence. People generally want to avoid confrontation, maintain positive relationships, and believe the best about others. These qualities strengthen healthy relationships but become vulnerabilities when dealing with individuals who intentionally ignore fairness and reciprocity. Another psychological factor involves the desire to maintain consistency. Once someone has helped repeatedly, they often feel compelled to continue helping because changing their behavior creates internal discomfort. Admitting they have been exploited requires acknowledging that previous sacrifices were taken for granted. To avoid this uncomfortable realization, they continue giving, hoping the relationship will eventually become balanced. Manipulative relationships frequently involve blurred responsibilities. The kind person begins solving problems that do not belong to them. They manage another person's emotions, finances, deadlines, or personal conflicts. Gradually, they assume responsibilities that the other individual should be handling independently. This imbalance creates emotional exhaustion because one person kept a disproportionate share of the relationship's weight. Recognizing manipulation requires paying attention to patterns rather than isolated events. Everyone occasionally needs help, makes mistakes, or asks for support. Healthy relationships involve mutual assistance during difficult times. The difference lies in reciprocity. Respectful individuals appreciate generosity, acknowledge sacrifices, and willingly offer support in return. Manipulative individuals often treat generosity as an expectation rather than a gift. Strong boundaries make manipulation significantly more difficult. A person who communicates clearly, asks thoughtful questions, and feels comfortable declining unreasonable requests provides fewer opportunities for emotional exploitation. Calm confidence disrupts manipulation because it removes the emotional leverage that guilt, fear, and excessive obligation depend upon. Kindness remains a powerful strength when it is guided by awareness, balanced by self-respect, and protected by the willingness to recognize when generosity is no longer being valued but merely being used. Many people believe they must choose between being kind and being strong. They imagine these qualities exist on opposite sides of the same scale, where becoming more compassionate means becoming less powerful, and becoming more powerful requires becoming colder or more selfish. This false choice has shaped countless relationships, careers, and personal decisions. In reality, the most respected individuals throughout history have understood that true influence comes from balancing compassion with strength. Kindness without power invites exploitation, while power without kindness creates fear instead of respect. Compassion is the ability to recognize another person's emotions, struggles, and needs. It allows people to connect, cooperate, and build trust. Power, on the other hand, is the ability to protect your values, make independent decisions, and influence the direction of your own life. These two qualities are not enemies. They strengthen each other when they exist in balance. A compassionate person with no personal boundaries may become overwhelmed by the demands of others. A powerful person without empathy may gain obedience but lose genuine loyalty. Psychology shows that people naturally admire individuals who demonstrate both confidence and emotional control. Confidence communicates competence, while compassion communicates humanity. When these qualities appear together, they create a powerful sense of stability. Others feel respected without believing they can take advantage of the relationship. This combination encourages cooperation because people understand that kindness is offered freely rather than demanded through obligation. One of the biggest misunderstandings about strength is the belief that it requires aggression. Aggression often comes from insecurity rather than confidence. An insecure person may raise their voice, dominate conversations, or intimidate others because they fear losing control. Genuine strength rarely needs dramatic displays. It appears in calm decisions, measured responses, and the ability to remain composed during conflict. A person who controls their emotions usually possesses more influence than someone who attempts to control everyone else. Compassion becomes most valuable when it is guided by wisdom instead of impulse. Not every problem is yours to solve. Not every request deserves a positive answer. Not every emotional crisis requires your personal sacrifice. Wise compassion considers both the needs of others and the consequences for yourself. It recognizes that helping someone should not require abandoning your own well-being or encouraging unhealthy dependence. Many people confuse self-sacrifice with love. They believe caring for others means constantly neglecting themselves. Over time, this mindset creates resentment because endless giving without recovery eventually leads to emotional exhaustion. A person who never protects their own energy gradually loses the ability to offer genuine kindness. Their generosity becomes driven by obligation instead of sincere willingness. Healthy relationships depend on mutual responsibility. Compassion encourages support, but power ensures accountability. Imagine a friend who repeatedly breaks promises, arrives late, or avoids taking responsibility for their actions. Compassion allows you to understand that everyone makes mistakes. Power allows you to communicate that repeated behavior has consequences. Without compassion, the response becomes harsh. Without power, the behavior continues unchecked. Leadership provides one of the clearest examples of this balance. The most effective leaders care about the people they guide, but they also make difficult decisions when necessary. They listen carefully, encourage growth, and show appreciation, yet they maintain standards that apply equally to everyone. Employees often respect leaders who combine fairness with firmness because expectations remain clear while dignity is preserved. This balance also strengthens personal confidence. Individuals who know they can defend themselves without becoming hostile experience less fear in difficult situations. They no longer avoid conflict simply to maintain temporary peace. Instead, they approach disagreements with calm communication and emotional stability. Their goal shifts from winning every argument to protecting mutual respect. Emotional intelligence plays a central role in balancing compassion and power. Self-awareness helps people recognize their own emotions before reacting impulsively. Self-regulation prevents anger from controlling decisions. Empathy allows them to understand another person's perspective without automatically agreeing with it. Social awareness helps them navigate relationships with sensitivity while maintaining personal integrity. Another important psychological principle is selective generosity. Resources such as time, attention, energy, and trust are limited. When these resources are given without consideration, they lose their value. Selective generosity does not mean becoming selfish. It means directing your efforts toward relationships built on mutual appreciation and respect. People tend to value kindness more when they understand it is a conscious choice rather than an endless supply. Confidence also changes the way compassion is perceived. When a confident person offers help, others often experience it as generosity. When someone lacking confidence offers identical help while seeking approval, it may be interpreted as obligation or insecurity. The action appears similar, but the underlying motivation creates a different psychological impression. Balancing compassion with power requires accepting an uncomfortable truth. Some people will dislike your boundaries. Others will become frustrated when you stop meeting every expectation. This reaction does not necessarily mean you have become unkind. It often means the relationship was built around unlimited access to your time, energy, or emotional support. Healthy people adjust to reasonable boundaries because they recognize that mutual respect benefits everyone involved. True personal strength is quiet rather than dramatic. It allows someone to forgive without forgetting important lessons, to help without becoming responsible for another person's choices, to remain patient without tolerating repeated disrespect, and to stand firmly by their values without losing their capacity for understanding, generosity, and genuine human compassion. Respect is not something that can be demanded, purchased, or manipulated into existence. It is earned through consistent behavior over time. Many people spend years trying to gain respect by pleasing everyone around them. They become more available, more agreeable, and more willing to sacrifice their own needs, believing these actions will naturally increase the admiration others have for them. Yet respect does not grow from endless accommodation. It grows from the combination of kindness, confidence, self-respect, and consistency. The challenge is not choosing between being kind and being respected. The challenge is learning how to express kindness without surrendering your sense of self. The first step is recognizing that kindness and people-pleasing are not the same thing. Kindness is a voluntary expression of compassion. It comes from genuine care and personal choice. People-pleasing, however, is often driven by fear. The fear of rejection, criticism, conflict, or disappointment pushes people to say yes when they want to say no. Although both behaviors may look similar from the outside, their psychological foundations are completely different. One comes from confidence, while the other comes from insecurity. People naturally respect those who respect themselves. Self-respect is communicated through everyday actions rather than dramatic speeches. It appears when someone protects their time, speaks honestly, follows through on commitments, and refuses to compromise their core values simply to gain approval. These behaviors send a clear message that the individual understands their own worth. Others tend to respond to that confidence because it creates stability and predictability. Learning to say no is one of the most important skills in building respect. Many people view refusal as an act of selfishness, but healthy boundaries actually improve relationships. A thoughtful no protects your ability to give a meaningful yes. If every request receives immediate agreement, your time and energy lose their value. When people understand that your commitments are intentional rather than automatic, they begin appreciating your willingness to help. Saying no does not require hostility or lengthy explanations. Calm confidence is often more powerful than emotional defense. A respectful refusal communicates that you value both yourself and the other person. It avoids unnecessary guilt while maintaining honesty. People may not always like hearing no, but emotionally mature individuals usually respect those who communicate clearly and consistently. Another important factor is emotional independence. Respect increases when your emotional state no longer depends entirely on the opinions of others. This does not mean ignoring feedback or pretending criticism never matters. It means developing an internal standard for evaluating yourself. When your identity depends solely on praise, every criticism feels devastating. When your confidence is grounded in personal values and consistent effort, outside opinions become information rather than definitions of your worth. Baby language also influences respect more than many people realize. Psychological research consistently shows that nonverbal communication shapes first impressions. Standing with balanced posture, maintaining appropriate eye contact, speaking at a measured pace, and avoiding unnecessary apologies all communicate confidence. These subtle behaviors reinforce the message that your kindness comes from strength rather than uncertainty. Consistency is equally important. People observe patterns over time. Someone who enforces boundaries one day but abandons them the next creates confusion. Inconsistent behavior encourages repeated testing because others become unsure about what standards actually exist. Consistent behavior, on the other hand, establishes reliability. Others learn what you expect and what you will accept, reducing unnecessary conflict. Respect also grows through competence. Confidence is easier to maintain when it is supported by genuine ability. Developing skills, honoring responsibilities, and continuously improving yourself create a quiet form of authority that requires little external validation. People naturally trust individuals who demonstrate both character and capability. Kindness becomes more influential when it is accompanied by visible competence. Another essential habit is choosing relationships carefully. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your time, trust, or emotional energy. Respectful individuals recognize reciprocity. They appreciate generosity, honor commitments, and contribute to the relationship instead of constantly taking from it. When someone repeatedly ignores your boundaries despite clear communication, limiting your investment becomes an act of wisdom rather than cruelty. Forgiveness also plays an important role, but forgiveness should not be confused with permission. You can forgive someone's mistakes without allowing the same harmful behavior to continue indefinitely. Compassion allows you to release bitterness. Self-respect prevents repeated exploitation. Together, they create emotional freedom while preserving personal dignity. One of the greatest transformations occurs when you stop trying to convince everyone to like you. Universal approval is impossible because people have different values, personalities, and expectations. Chasing acceptance from every person guarantees constant anxiety. Accept that some people will disagree with your choices allows you to make decisions based on principles instead of popularity. Authenticity becomes the foundation of lasting respect. When your words match your actions, people know what to expect from you. They may not agree with every decision, but they recognize integrity. Integrity creates trust because it demonstrates that your behavior is guided by values rather than convenience. The goal is not to become less kind. The goal is to make kindness a conscious choice instead of an automatic response driven by fear. Genuine respect develops when compassion is strengthened by confidence, generosity is protected by boundaries, and empathy is balanced with self-respect. A person who values both others and themselves creates relationships built on mutual appreciation instead of obligation, earning admiration through character, consistency, emotional maturity, and unwavering personal integrity.